Okay, checking a few things. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. It is 8 a.m. here on my end on Pacific time in Vancouver. And we'll be getting started here in just a minute. And I'll have a few updates for you along the way. Perfect. I see some people coming in. Yes. Okay, so let's so a couple updates here as we get started. Cancel this and let me go full screen here. Welcome, everyone. Today we'll be talking about democratizing data. Some of the best practices on dashboards, habits, routines. It's an interesting topic. It's definitely more popular than I expected. Some housekeeping. The session will be recorded, and there'll be a recording available within 24 hours, including the slides. So a link to download the slides. It's about 20 slides. I have about 35 minutes of content, which we'll go through right now. If you have any questions, you can post them in the Zoom chat. I think there's also a Q&A module here you can use. Either of them will work. You can post them along the way. I'll take breaks to answer them. And then I'll also have a small section at the end where we can go through some questions. We might finish a little early, which is great. Everyone gets a little bit of time, but let's see how we do on questions. So for those who don't know me, my name is Ruben. I'm a data strategy here at Practical, and we work with technology companies, e-commerce companies, government organizations, and we typically work across the entire life cycle. So this might mean strategy, implementation, training, and actually using the data, which is the topic of our webinar. So a simple outline for what we will talk about over the next 30 minutes. Talk a little about why we're here, where this fits in a data strategy or in maybe a data journey. I want to show you what success looks like. Maybe break some myths around what data-driven organizations do or what they don't do, and then share some best practices on how you can actually get your team to use your data. Okay. So this is the typical data lifecycle that I share with clients. And, we start with a data strategy. We might design a stack, or we might choose technology here. We might build a data schema that is trying to figure out what we want to track. Then we implement it, and then we train people on how to use the data and the tools we selected. 4 or 5 steps. You can add a few steps. You might remove a few steps, but this is the rough timeline that a company goes through. And you might repeat this, of course, as you do upgrades, as you add new things, as your company grows and you need better technology or something that suits your current stage. What we will be talking about today is actually primarily past training. That is, we already done all this work, and now you have data in some form, and you really want to figure out how you get it in the hands of your team. I find a lot of companies discover that they went through all this effort and people aren't really using the data as they expected. It's just not being seen by anyone, and it almost seems like a waste of time. So we really want to figure out how we can fix this, how we can really make the most of the investment we did across this 5 steps. I've been sharing some of the stats in some previous presentations, but if you look at most surveys on data and how organizations are using it, there's some pretty consistent trends. We see most companies want to invest more, especially in big data and AI. maybe about half the companies, 50, 60%, don't really feel like they have a data-driven organization. That is, they don't really feel good. They can make decisions with the data. But the investment will continue to go up. So I think this is the disconnect that I really want to tackle here, which is companies are willing to spend money on data. They're going through it. They're choosing technology. They're training their people. But there still seems to be a disconnect in how much they can actually use the data on a day-to-day basis on their actual work. And I think it comes down to not knowing how to really get into the hands of people. And I really think it's more of a psychological problem, more of a human problem than the technology problem. But we'll cover some technology things that could help here. So let me show you 3 case studies from my client work. Now, most of my clients are confidential, but in this case, I'll share some attributes just to give you some context. And what you're seeing in this case studies and different stories is that getting a company to use data, it's quite different for every organization. It doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be advanced. It doesn't mean that everyone is running SQL and building models and every single decision they make is backed by data. There's different shades of what this might look like. But I would say consistently across the board, it's solving some clear problem. Something that companies really struggle to do. If you can imagine your company, there's probably been different cases of clear problems that the entire company felt. Maybe you were growing too fast and you couldn't support new users. You didn't have enough capacity to support or onboard new users. Maybe retention isn't strong enough, so it's preventing you from growing as fast, right? So this first case study this is a fitness provider, and they provide classes in person in studios to different studio partners. Because of COVID-19, they actually had to move online, as many businesses have done, and they moved their fitness classes to just live classes online through webinars and so on. And in their case, we end up going through a few technology choices, tools like Mixpanel, where you're seeing here in front of you is actually Data Studio. And what they really needed to do is a way to summarize the engagement on their platform, on their online classes. So how many people were playing videos, how many people were completing those videos, how many people were registering for live sessions and then attending, and then be able to do that by the different partners they work with, so different instructors. And then in their case, their clients were different corporations. So they wanted to show each corporation how their employees were engaging with the content. So we built this Data Studio report here, this dashboard. And what was great here is that everyone could come in and look at these numbers on a weekly basis, see the performance, break it down by partner, break it down by corporate client. So the account managers could have a simple way to do a few clicks and see how their client, their corporate client, is performing. The people who work with vendors or partners, they could do the same thing. And it was simple. Now, this organization, their technical expertise wasn't very high. So something like SQL, self-service data, expecting them to go through the data on their own actually wasn't very feasible. They really just wanted the numbers in some kind of summary format like this. So this is a big win for them. And it made it easier for everyone to be aware of how well the company was doing on a regular basis. And this report actually was mostly automated, maybe about 90% automated. So the data was near real time. Second case study. This is actually the provincial government here in BC, Canada. And I got a chance to work with them on the tourism side. And as you can imagine, tourism is also very heavily affected by COVID-19 right now. So what they needed was a way to support their internal and external stakeholders. As a provincial government body, one of the mandates is to be able to provide information to the different hotels and tourism bodies throughout the province. And we decided to build a dashboard. In this case, this is built on Tableau as a technology. And we're pulling data sources from maybe about 50 different locations, everything from COVID data, hotel data, travel data, airport data. We have our international airport here, government regulations, and we do this across different markets. Our market, Canada's a market, and there's a few international markets that we care about from a tourism perspective. And we build it here into a single place. And you can see there's 3 tabs and some other information here. What was helpful here is, they were getting lots of questions from different people. What's going on here? Are you marketing? Should we market? What should we do? So we wanted to really guide people to a single place where they could look at those, look at the relevant data. Same thing, this data is updated on a daily basis. It's much more manual than the previous case study. And that's just because the data that we get here is coming from PDFs and Excels, and it's all over the place. But again, another big win for them, and they could move on to do other things, to spend their resources doing other things, not just simply answering basic queries about when are you going to market, when should we start marketing. And the third case study gets a little bit of what we will talk about today. In this case, this is a consumer language learning product on iOS and Android. And, they made several common technology choices that you'll probably relate to, Amplitude, Segment, Google Analytics. But I think what was really interesting for them is they brought all of it into Slack. So when they communicated in their channels, they could do things like this, right? They could, copy charts or links to charts, and then you get a quick preview of the chart here. It's actually an image here in the center, and people are able to see what you're talking about, what's sort of the data point you're referring to within Slack. So it becomes very convenient. You don't have to be an Amplitude expert or a Google Analytics expert to sort of understand the chart, and it just made it much more accessible for people to work with the data. Okay, so let me take a quick break here. Let me switch my full screen, make sure I answer all the questions. Okay, no questions. So that's, so those are 3 examples of what success looks like in this field. And what I really want you to think about is you have data in different tools, different formats. It could even be just, spreadsheets and Google Sheets. That's still data, it's still data infrastructure. It doesn't have to be an advanced data warehouse. So we want to get into the hands of people as easily as possible. I think really the theme that you'll see throughout this 6 best practices is that we really want to remove friction from the process. Asking someone to click 2 or 3 times, to go to a bookmark, to load a report, or say worse, to just build the reports on their own, might be too much friction. And most people in most organizations, when they go through data, it's typically an add-on, right? You work in marketing, you work in product, you're an executive, you already have a full-time job, and you have a task list that's much more than you can actually do. And now you might be given another to-do item, data. You have to learn this tool, you have to go here, you want the answers. And for some people, the usage of data is very clear, and they spend time on their own. Maybe they have previous experience, and they can sort of get up and running quite quickly. But for others, it's not the case. So we'll go for some best practices here. So let's just jump in. Number 1, right format. Data comes in many formats. Right now I showed you 2 dashboards, Data Studio and Tableau. This could be, let's say, available on web or in mobile. But you can also send the data through email, like an email summary where it's actually summarized within the body of the email. We looked at Slack, be able to summarize the data within your internal chat tool, which could be Slack, Microsoft Teams, maybe Jira has one, whatever it is. Building that where people are, this could also be the same for a wiki. If your company has internal documentation that people check on a regular basis, maybe add it there. And physical copy. The physical copy, maybe not so relevant right now as most companies work on a remote basis. But I know several executives who prefer physical copy. Their email and just everything that this digital is just has so much noise that literally printing a report might be the most effective way of getting the data to them. And the point here is there's no there's no best format for a company. You really want multiple formats. So you really want to be able to support as many formats as possible and try to find the right format for each individual. So you might find people who work, let's say, in product or in marketing and who are very familiar with the data. They just need a dashboard, right? They're going to they're going to make a bookmark on their computer or make a bookmark on their phone, and they just click that through. Other people who might never really come across the data on a regular basis might really benefit from email. They see email on a regular basis. Same with Slack and same with physical copy. So you really want to put it in a place where people are going to almost trip on it. Would might be the metaphor here. Where somewhere that people will definitely see it, that people are already checking, and that you can make it easy to do this. And there's so many ways now to be able to add formats if your tool itself doesn't support it. So maybe your analytics tool doesn't have a way to send email reports, or it doesn't have a way to send to integrate with Slack. You could look at things like Zapier, if this and that, and some of the other automation glue connectors tools out there that can then let you create connections between two things. Maybe you have a connection between your analytics tool and Slack, or maybe you have links. There's different ways, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't mean you always have to embed the data in an email, or always have to embed the data in Slack. You just have to have a way of notifying people that, hey, here's some new data, here's the latest data, or just check out the data. Tableau, for example, that governmental dashboard we saw, we can actually send that via email, and we can embed it as an image in the email, or we can actually embed it as a PDF. So there's a few options, but the email is quite simple, but it's good enough. We've been using that internally with key people in the company, and they find it really helpful because they don't need to remember to go check it out, right? It's not in the back of their head thinking, I should go check out the dashboard. It just comes in once a day at 7 a.m. So as they go through their email, they see it, they download the PDF, they go through it, in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and they get what they need from it. So it's very easy, very convenient. And that's really what you really want to tackle with your data, regardless of where it is, what tools you use. Really want to be able to support multiple formats. Now, I want to make just a quick pause here on dashboard design. I get lots of questions around how to best design the dashboard. In general, less is more. In the dashboard, you really want to just show what is relevant. And this might mean that the best way to do this is to have multiple dashboards. So you might have a dashboard that's company-wide that everyone looks at, but that's bound to be not as effective as a dashboard that is team-specific, just for the marketing team, just for the product team, maybe just for a specific product if your company has multiple products. But some other things to keep in mind, and I'll use this governmental COVID-19 dashboard I showed earlier. It's not perfect. There's definitely a few things that could be improved. But I think it does hit a few of the major ideas that I think dashboards should tackle. So the first is always having summaries, charts that show trend lines that allow people to hover, to have more interactivity, like a lot of the charts you see here on the far right. They're really nice, but same thing, right? We want to assume that people are busy. They might only have a few minutes to look at something. So if they only have a couple minutes, what should they look at, right? Where's sort of the best bang for the buck? So always having some kind of summary is nice. So in this case, our left-hand column functions as a summary. So we have a literal summary, which is a text you see there in the far left. But we also summarize some of the most important numbers, like the COVID data on the far left. We also summarize the government regulations, as we call them, and this is just how strict governments are right now with COVID-19 regulations. You know, can people go out to restaurants? Can people get on local transportation? What's the maximum number of people that can gather in one point? So we have all those on the left hand column, and we color them, right? So in some cases we have 3 values, so we use a very simple red, green, yellow coloring. But if you only have a couple minutes, you would just look at the section. Then we get into the rest of the dashboard. So naturally, we want visual representations. You know, just putting a table over might not be the best way to show data. It might be simple, but you really do want to have visual ways of representing data, so we can see trend. You know, we can see trends. You know, we can see that this number has been decreasing for the past 4 weeks, or we can see that, you know, how this number compares to the previous year. There's actually a few charts that you can't see here in the screenshot where we compare, you know, 2020 versus 2019. It's a very natural question. You know, if travel is down, if the number of people who are going through the airport is down, how much is it? So we want to look at, you know, July 2020 versus July 2019 to kind of get a sense of what the drop is. And as you can imagine, the drop is significant. You know, 95% less traffic at international airports. I also think it's nice to be able to add interaction to the dashboard. So this allows you to have depth on your design. So for people who do want to go deeper, people who want to become familiar with it over time, the interaction, and this might be the ability to hover, maybe the ability to have filters. We actually have a tab here in this dashboard where people can filter by market. So they can look at only the Canada data, only the Australia data, or the United States data. That's nice. So people have an ability to go deeper and play with the data on their own. Same with Data Studio. You know, it's quite easy to add different filters and ways of showing data to get different insights. I think your data needs to have a logical structure to it, and this might vary. If you're looking at company-wide dashboard, you might start with, you know, revenue and profitability at the top, or growth. Let's say if you're a venture-backed company, and they go down through logical categories, maybe sales, marketing, customer support, and so on. But there's a structure to it that makes sense. You know, in that case, we use COVID data, number one. Then we go into unemployment numbers. We have traveler bookings, and then traveler sentiment. So we're gonna go, you know, we sort of designed this across 3 categories. You know, what is happening, which is sort of like COVID numbers and so on. What are people doing? And then what are people thinking? Those were sort of 3 ways of organizing the data. And then we built it around that. One thing this dashboard doesn't have is actually date comparison. I always think date comparisons are really helpful. Now, we have some charts, like as I mentioned before, where we compare 2020 versus 2019, for example. But I really think it's nice when you give people the ability to compare data manually. That is, they can run an analysis of the last 30 days versus the previous 30 days, or the last 3 months versus the previous 3 months, things like that. So we don't have that in this dashboard. The dates are set, and it's just a single view for dates. Over time, you of course want to compress it, you know, have less charts. Maybe you can combine multiple charts into one chart to show the same idea. I also think it's helpful to answer this you know, WDIM question. It's something I'm covering in this upcoming book that I'm writing. But it basically just stands for, what does this, you know, what does it mean? So whenever we look at any data, any chart, any dashboard, you know, what does it really mean? Like, what should we care? You know, if revenue is dropping by 20%, what does it mean? Like, what should we do, right? It's not enough to just have data and charts and KPIs. We really want to help people understand what they should be doing differently in their jobs, in their strategy, in their approach. In this case, we try and do that with that top left section, the summary, where this is a free text that we write on a weekly basis, and we try to explain what does it all mean, right? So we might be saying, hey, we can see COVID numbers are increasing slightly. People are allowed to travel internally, so we're focusing on that. Everything else is still closed. So we give people an idea of like, okay, this means that I could probably advertise on an internal basis here locally in BC, but I can't advertise to the US yet. The border between the US and Canada is closed. And again, multiple formats. We cover that. This dashboard in particular is available on desktop, on mobile. There's some email formats, and we're looking at bringing it into Slack and a few other places. So some of the ideas to think about for dashboard design. Number 2. So the second best practice here is getting data into the people's hands. So we talk about format, which is what I might consider a digital category. So we want to take the data, put it into digital formats, SMS, email, and so on. But you also want to go beyond that. So some things I've seen work well. Some of my clients have actually implemented data-specific meetings. So this might be an hour a week, maybe 30 minutes a week. And it's just a time where people can come in, bring their questions on the data itself, and then answer them. And it also functions as a training vehicle. So that could be an option. I also think people plays a big role. As I mentioned, in some companies, the idea of having self-service data might actually never be the right fit. And you will actually need data analysts or data scientists to bridge the gap between the people who want the data and the people who have the data. So you do want to think about that. So if your company is struggling with self-service, is sort of struggling to get people to look at the data on a regular basis, maybe it's not so much trying to hack it, trying to just tell them to do it. You might actually just need to hire someone to do it. I always think companies should try some of the digital changes I mentioned before, the different formats, different ways of consuming data, maybe even implementing a meeting where people can go and get their questions answered. But if you're still not seeing the progress that you're expecting, it might just be a question of of having a data analyst who's actually gonna go through the data, summarize it, and just give the final reports to people that they can use. There's also, nowadays we're seeing a lot more machine learning being built into analytics tools. And what this means is it can make it easier to surface insights. So this is a tool called Mixpanel, a product analytics tool. And you can take a funnel report in Mixpanel and then use machine learning to try to surface insights. And what it does is it sends this email here, and it just simply looks through all the different segments and event properties that you have. And it tells you, if it converted higher than the average, and if it's, changing over time and so on. So this is just a way to sort of sort through the data to find insights, to find interesting things that you should be looking at. And this might be, again, another way to make it easier to consume data. Google Analytics does this as well. I don't think you can send it out via email. I'm not quite sure. But it's trying to find sort of interesting things, spikes, drops, anything that you might be looking at. And of course, I've seen software tools that are starting to do more of this just in general. So again, another way perhaps of getting data in people's hands is to just send the insights. Send a summary of what they should be looking at instead of asking them to build that summary or find those insights themselves. Number 3, support. You really want to support the people who are going to be using data or who want to be using data. And this looks in a couple ways. The first way is be able to answer questions for people while also training them. So there'll be some people in your organization who really do want to use data. They're interested. They think it's a valuable skill set they want to add to their repertoire, but they need help, right? They never use specific tools. They may not have much experience. So they want help. They want guidance, almost like training wheels. So that might look in the format of one-on-one training sessions, or just answering questions via email or Slack or whatever it may be. And then the second thing you might look at is just a data analyst, which we covered before, where people don't necessarily want help understanding the data. They just want a summary of the data. They just want the final report that summarizes what they care about. So for those people, whether they're executive or not, then it becomes a question of how do we do that, right? How do we support these different groups of people who might want to use data differently? It also brings a question of, on the technology side, how do you make sure that the technology you chose supports both ideas? I was hearing about several of my friends, are looking for jobs right now, and I'm always fascinated to see what kind of things companies are asking for when it comes to product roles and marketing roles. And there's been a couple companies that they actually require you to know SQL before you actually, you could join their team. And the reason why is because their entire data infrastructure has been built around this. So they don't have a lot of self-service data that's, friendly to non-technical people, but they have lots of ways for you to query the data through SQL. So they have self-selected or filtered their hires to know SQL. So then everyone in the company has the ability to go and get their own data for the most part, basic queries, but they need to know SQL. That's already the prerequisite. So that's fine. If your organization wants to build in that direction, you can. That means, your pool of candidates is less, of course, but it also means that your data infrastructure doesn't have to be as complex. It can be actually relatively simple if you assume that everybody knows the same thing. So different ways of how you can structure a company, or how you can think about bringing support. Number 4, and the best practice here, is you do need someone or a team that's doing the heavy duty analysis. You can think about data in different ways, but a good chunk of it, a lot of what we talk about right now is what I would consider insights, but they are more surface level insights. So maybe you're looking at a performance on a marketing campaign, or how a new product perform, or how a new feature is being adopted. Those things are important, and you need a way to get into people's hands. But they're also not as heavy duty, right? When it comes to heavy duty, we might be looking at machine learning models, or really very intensive projects, right? Maybe we want to understand churn, and we want to run a study on churn over 3 months to understand really what drives churn, right? And that's a heavy duty analysis. So you do need someone in your company who can do this, or a team. This might be where you have data scientists play a role if your company is building towards that. It might also mean having dedicated data analysts who have more of a research background, and who can spend the time going through this heavy duty analysis. But same thing, I think this it's helpful. It's a different way of working with the data, but nonetheless, it's needed. And stories. Number 5 would be stories. Data on its own, even for someone like me who works with it on a regular basis, it's not always that excited, right? And if you're working with different people, you might find that some people just actually do not find numbers exciting, right? They're just numbers. A 20% increase, a 15% decrease, 1,000 people versus 500. So really, building stories around the data is a way to also make people much more interested in it. And simple stories have simple structures, right? We might have characters, which are your customers or users. There might be a plot, like a challenge. There's maybe a climax, which looks at maybe the process of how you're solving the challenge, and then the resolution, or best practices or learnings. So you might have a challenge with retention, and then you have a story, whether it's a presentation or a brief or something else, where you're showing where you were as a company when it was retention, what you did, how you explored it, how you learned more about it, how you discovered the key behaviors that were driving retention, and then the resolution of what you're doing with that, how you change the product or engaging with customers differently. So that story is supported by data, but it's a much more interesting way of using numbers and telling it. And I think it's much more easily digestible for people who are on the outside, who are used to looking at just numbers, on the spreadsheet or slide after slide, build into a story. And the last best practice is really around expectations. So what is expected of the people in your organization when it comes to data, right? And there's many instances where data can be helpful. It doesn't mean it needs to be used in every single instance, but what is expected when new ideas are presented? Is there data that needs to go along with those new ideas to back it up why this is something that should be done? Whenever debrief or postmortems are done on something, whether something failed or something did well, is there data there that's expected? For new marketing campaigns, when problems arise, sudden spikes or drops, when new team members are brought on board, as they are trained and onboarded, is there a specific time where they spent just looking at the data, understanding how data works in the company? And of course, when new product features are released. So some companies start to add expectations here. So they might say, hey, this weekly meeting where you're summarizing what happened, or you're telling us what went well, what went right. We want to see some numbers. It doesn't mean we need to see 20 charts, but we want to see a couple numbers that you think were helpful, or you think were relevant. And this is you start to change the expectations, and you start to force people to become more familiar with the data, to go after it. You still have to make it easy. You don't want to tell people, we expect numbers, and we also expect you to to learn all these tools and do this very quickly. I think they go hand in hand, but the expectations matter, right? The more your company expects numbers for different things, the more you're likely going to see them on a regular basis, on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so we are 35 minutes in, just about what I expected. Let me know if there's any questions along the way, so you can put them in the chat or in the Q&A portion. So I'll give you a couple minutes there. If not, we'll be finishing very soon. Also, let me know, any feedback on the webinar itself. I'm working on the topic for August. We'll see what we do. Like I said, I thought this webinar was more popular than I expected. I think it's a tricky problem to solve. There's lots of moving pieces, but it's also quite essential to get it right. Okay, I don't see any questions. So some key takeaways here for you to think about, and where are sort of the one or two lessons that could be relevant for your team. So one, it's really all about getting data into people's hands, whether you do it through different digital channels, Slack, email, dashboards, physical copy, whatever it may be. It's really about just getting it into their hands. Make it really easy, almost make it like they're tripping over the data. And it's hard to miss. It used to be, when people were back in the office, you could have TV dashboards, which I thought could be quite helpful for people to look at the data as they're getting their coffee, or as they are hanging hanging out by the metaphorical water cooler. They can still do that in a digital way, right? Number two, you have to support your team, whether it's supporting people who do want to learn about how to use the data, and they have the time to do this, or just people who want the summary and just want the final report. You need different ways of supporting your team. Also thinking about that heavy duty analysis that we talked about. Number three, as a standalone point, is still stories. I think it makes numbers much more digestible, much more interesting, and something that people can care about when it's a story about their company or what they're doing or why this matters. And lastly, manage expectations. So how you expect data to be used will eventually change the culture of your company. If you don't expect data to be used in any way, you shouldn't be surprised if you don't see it in any report or in any presentation or in any update. Perfect. So that's all I have. Thank you once again for being with me today. Hope it was helpful. You'll get the recording and the slides within 24 hours. If you have any feedback on the webinar, let me know. Always interested in hearing that. And we'll talk soon. Thank you, everybody.